The galactic trade hub of Tyron 5 was alive with activity. Traders shouted their deals, hover carts zipped through narrow streets, and beings from 100 worlds haggled over exotic wares. Amid this bustling scene, a human named Nathan strolled through the market, his curiosity leading him past stalls selling shimmering fabrics and crystalline gadgets. Nathan was an engineer, a tinkerer by trade. His sharp eyes picked out unusual machines and rare parts, his mind already devising ways to adapt alien tech for human use. But today, something different caught his attention. A commotion near the center of the square. A makeshift stage had been erected, surrounded by a mix of curious onlookers and indifferent passersby. On the stage stood an alien auctioneer with a booming voice and dramatic gestures. But Nathan's gaze was drawn to the figure beside the auctioneer. A woman, tall and slender, her lavender skin glowing faintly under the twin suns, stood shackled. Her luminous blue eyes searched the crowd with a mix of defiance and fear, and her silvery hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. The sight struck a chord deep in Nathan's chest. "Up for bid," bellowed the auctioneer. A rare beauty from the Zyron cluster, skilled in a variety of. Nathan stopped listening. Disgust curled in his stomach, though he kept his face neutral. In the wider galaxy, humans were known for their quick tempers, and drawing attention here wasn't a good idea. Still, walking away felt wrong. 2,000 credits, someone called. Nathan's hand instinctively went to his pocket, where his credit chip rested. He wasn't wealthy by any stretch, but he had enough saved for emergencies. And right now, this felt like one. 2,500, Nathan said, his voice cutting through the noise. Heads turned. The auctioneer raised a brow ridge, surprised to hear a bid from a human. Nathan met his gaze steadily, hoping his expression masked the turmoil he felt. 3,000, a hulking Morven growled. Nathan's mind raced. If this became a bidding war, he wouldn't stand a chance. But then an idea sparked. A risky, clever idea, the kind that humans were becoming infamous for. He stepped closer to the stage. "I'll offer a trade instead," he called out, holding up a small rectangular device, a multiphasic flux stabilizer, rare, valuable, and impossible to replicate. The auctioneer hesitated. Such a device could fetch far more than mere credits in the right hands. "Let me see it." Nathan tossed it up onto the stage. The auctioneer examined the stabilizer, his eyes glittering with greed. "Very well," he said after a pause. "Sold." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as Nathan stepped forward. The shackled woman looked at him with suspicion, her luminous eyes narrowing. The auctioneer released her restraints with a casual flick of a key, handing her off to Nathan, as if transferring property. Nathan nodded politely and turned to leave, the woman trailing behind him cautiously. The crowd dispersed quickly, their brief entertainment over. As they walked through the maze of streets, Nathan finally spoke. "You don't have to come with me if you don't want to," he said without turning around. The woman stopped. "Why did you buy me?" she demanded, her voice soft but sharp. Nathan turned to face her. "I didn't buy you," he said firmly. "I freed you. You're not a possession, not to me or anyone else." She frowned, clearly skeptical. "Then why would you spend so much on someone you don't even know?" "Because it was the right thing to do," he replied simply. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decipher his intentions. Finally, she crossed her arms. "What happens now?" Nathan shrugged. "That's up to you. You can go wherever you want, or I can help you get somewhere safe." The woman hesitated. The offer of freedom was unexpected, almost incomprehensible. She had lived her life under the control of others, her choices stolen at every turn. Now, this human, this stranger, was giving it all back. "I don't trust you," she said bluntly. Nathan gave a small, rueful smile. "That's fair. You don't have to. Just know I mean what I say." She studied him for another long moment, then gave a curt nod. "For now, I'll stay with you. until I figure out what to do next. Nathan extended his hand. I'm Nathan. She hesitated again before placing her slender hand in his. Alyra, she said quietly. Nice to meet you, Alyra, Nathan said with a warm smile. As they began walking again, Alyra couldn't shake the feeling that this human was different from anyone she had ever met. For the first time in her life, the chains she had worn, both physical and invisible, felt like they might finally be gone. The small, modest spaceport was quiet compared to the crowded marketplace. Nathan led Alyra to a private corner of the hangar where his ship, an older but well-maintained vessel, sat waiting. It had a simple design, but it was home to Nathan, a place where he had spent countless hours working alone, tinkering and fixing whatever needed fixing. Home sweet home, Nathan said, opening the door to the ship and gesturing for Alyra to enter first. The inside was cozy but utilitarian. A narrow hallway led into the small living quarters. Alyra walked inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the simple furnishings with curiosity. Nathan smiled as he closed the door behind them. Make yourself comfortable. I'm sure you're tired after everything that's happened. Alyra looked at the small table in the corner, the stack of tools Nathan had left out, and the basic equipment scattered around. It was a stark contrast to the lavish homes she had been confined to in the past, even though they had not been hers to enjoy. A strange sense of freedom washed over her, but the weight of her new situation still hung heavily. You don't have to give me a place to stay, Alyra said cautiously. I can manage on my own. I'm used to surviving. Nathan shook his head. You're free to do whatever you like, Alyra. This is your choice, remember. But for now, if you want a safe place to rest, this is it. Alyra wasn't sure how to react to such kindness, something she had never known before. Her life had been one of commands and obedience, where she was never treated as an equal. She didn't know what it felt like to simply exist without fear or expectation. Her eyes wandered to the small window in the corner of the room. Beyond it, she could see the expanse of the stars, a breathtaking view of a galaxy that seemed endless. For a brief moment, she let herself dream of a life beyond servitude, one where she could be free to choose her path. But the doubt quickly followed. Could she truly embrace such a life? Would someone like Nathan actually want to help her? Sensing her uncertainty, Nathan spoke gently, trying not to crowd her. You don't have to answer now. Take your time. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore. Alyra turned to face him, her blue eyes filled with questions and suspicion. Why did you help me? You don't owe me anything. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, thinking carefully about his answer. Sometimes it just feels like the right thing to do. I believe that every living being deserves respect, especially after what I've seen humans go through. We're a young species compared to many others, but our survival's based on our ability to help each other, not control or hurt others. Alyra could see the sincerity in Nathan's face, but she struggled to understand. On her world, and in many others, kindness was a rare and often overlooked trait. Everything had a price. There was no such thing as an unselfish act. So, you expect nothing in return? She asked, trying to piece together his true motives. Nathan shrugged casually. I'd never ask for something in return. That's not what this is about. If you feel like helping, maybe one day you can. But for now, just know that your freedom is yours, not anyone else's. I can show you how humans live our lives. No strings attached. Alyra was quiet for a moment as she tried to process his words. Slowly, she nodded. She didn't trust easily, but something about Nathan's quiet strength and genuine nature began to soften her walls. Nathan walked over to a small bench and motioned for her to sit. Tell me a little about your past, if you're comfortable, he said, sitting across from her. I've never known anyone like you, someone who's lived under such restrictions. I think there's a lot I could learn from you too. The offer seemed odd to Alyra. In her past, others had always wanted to control her, force her to do things she didn't want to do. But Nathan wasn't asking for anything. His only interest was in her freedom. and that baffled her. I was born on a planet that values power and control over everything else. Alira began quietly, her voice steady but distant. From the moment I could walk, I was trained. Trained to serve, to obey. My life, it wasn't mine. She paused, the weight of her words sinking in. She had spent years being a tool, nothing more. Even when she had been treated well, by the standards of her people, it wasn't kindness. It was just a calculated part of the system. And now, what do you want, now that you're free? Nathan asked gently. Alira met his eyes. I don't know. I don't know how to be free. I've never had a choice in my life. But I want to learn. I want to understand this thing you call freedom. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. That's a start. And we'll go slow, all right. We don't have to rush into anything. Just one day at a time. For the first time, Alira smiled, just a small one. It was faint, but it was there. Nathan smiled back, relieved to see a flicker of hope in her eyes. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. Both had been shaped by their experiences. Both carried scars from the past. But unlike many, they now had a chance to reshape their future. And for the first time, Alira felt that maybe, just maybe, her future could be something of her own making. The days that followed were quiet, and yet they were filled with small moments of growth. Nathan and Alira moved slowly, adjusting to this new dynamic between them. One where freedom wasn't just a word, but something they both began to truly understand. The ship, once a solitary space for Nathan, was now shared, and each day the two of them spent together brought new challenges, but also new possibilities. Nathan worked on various mechanical projects, his skills always put to use fixing something in need of repair, building gadgets to help around the ship, or modifying technology for better functionality. Alira was curious about everything Nathan did, watching him with growing interest. She had seen machines and technology in her life, but her world had been one of luxury and control, not of hands-on work and invention. One afternoon, Nathan was deep into rewiring part of the engine when he noticed Alira standing by the open hatch, her gaze fixed on the starry void outside. "Something on your mind?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag and walking over to her. She didn't immediately respond. The vastness of space was breathtaking, but it wasn't just the view that occupied her thoughts. She felt a strange sense of peace when she stood there. No commands, no expectations, just the endless reach of the stars, and the feeling that maybe she was free to make her own choices after all. "I've never been outside my planet much," Alira said, her voice distant. "Everything I've ever known, it's been so controlled." Nathan nodded in understanding, standing beside her now. "I know what you mean. For most humans, freedom didn't come without a fight. But once we got a taste of it, we did everything we could to protect it." Alira turned to look at him. "What about you? How did you get here, to this place, to this freedom?" Nathan smiled softly. "I guess I never really fit in where I came from. Humans were so focused on their own survival, they didn't take the time to care about others. I grew up knowing that we could do better. So I worked hard to build things that could make a difference. And of course, I got into a little trouble along the way." Alira raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Trouble? I've crossed a few borders in my time, both literal and figurative," Nathan confessed with a grin. "But you see, that's the thing about humans. We'll bend the rules, maybe even break them when necessary, but we'll never stop trying to help those around us. It's in our nature." Alira studied him, taking in his words. They were strange to her, but somehow they made sense. She had never met anyone like Nathan before. There was no manipulation in his actions, no hidden agenda. He was kind because he chose to be, not because he had to. "You must miss it," Alira said suddenly, after a long pause. "Being around others, not being alone." Nathan chuckled softly. "I've been alone long enough to know how to take care of myself. But yeah, it's nice to have company, even if it's not always easy." A silence fell between them. The stars outside twinkled as they both thought about the choices they had made in their lives. Elira to escape her controlled existence, and Nathan to break free from the loneliness of his own life. Elira took a deep breath. I've been taught to expect that when people offer help, there's always a catch. That kindness comes with a price. Nathan looked at her, his expression warm but serious. I understand where you're coming from. Trust is hard to rebuild when it's been broken so many times. But here's the thing. You don't owe me anything, Elira. You never will. Not as long as you're with me. Elira studied his face again. She had always looked for hidden motives in the actions of others. It was how she had survived, how she had learned to shield herself from false kindness. But Nathan wasn't like the others. He didn't need anything from her except her own freedom, something she never thought she'd have to fight for. Why do you think you're different? She asked quietly. Nathan blinked in surprise. Different how? Elira turned her gaze back to the stars, her voice softer this time. You say you don't expect anything in return. I just wonder why. What's so special about me that makes you want to help? Nathan took a step closer, his voice calm but sincere. It's not about you being special, Elira. It's about everyone having the right to be free, everyone having the right to live without fear. He paused. If that makes me different from others, then maybe that's a good thing. Elira felt a wave of conflicting emotions. She couldn't deny that his words comforted her. She couldn't deny that she felt something she hadn't before, a strange warmth spreading within her, like the glow of the stars outside the window. Maybe I'm starting to believe you, she whispered, more to herself than to Nathan. Nathan smiled, but it wasn't the wide grin he usually wore. It was a small, knowing smile. No rush. I know this isn't easy. Elira turned to him, her eyes more open now. Thank you for believing in me. For the first time since they had met, Nathan felt something shift between them. The bonds of trust were fragile and uncertain, but they were there, forming quietly in the background. As the silence settled over them, they both realized something unspoken, that despite the vastness of space and the new journey they had embarked on, they were no longer just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. Somehow, in their quiet moments, they were beginning to build something new. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet activities, but there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere of the ship. Elira was slowly becoming more comfortable with her new surroundings, and Nathan continued to patiently let her explore her newfound freedom. It was clear now that she was eager to learn about this strange new life that was unlike anything she had known before. One morning, after a quick breakfast of simple but hearty food Nathan had prepared, he walked over to a workbench where various tools and mechanical parts were strewn about. Elira had noticed this task over and over again in the past few days, the quiet work that filled the long hours. Today, she walked up beside him. I could help with something, Elira said softly, eyeing the tools curiously. I've always been taught to make myself useful in any way I can. I don't have much to offer, but perhaps I can try. Nathan looked up, his face lighting up with a smile. You don't have to prove anything, Elira. But I'd be glad to show you how this works, if you're interested. It's just a way of making life a little easier out here, and it could be fun. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She had always followed orders before, never been allowed to explore new ideas. This was new territory. I'm ready to learn, she said firmly, though there was a touch of nervousness in her voice. Nathan showed her the basics, how to disassemble a piece of machinery, how the parts fit together, and how to tell which components were necessary for repairs. He started with something simple, fixing a malfunctioning panel on one of the ship's doors. It was a small job, but it was enough to show her how human ingenuity worked, how much care and attention Nathan paid to even the smallest details. Elira carefully watched his every move, her fingers brushing over the parts he had shown her. As Nathan worked, he patiently explained things she didn't quite understand, repeating himself when needed. He took the time to answer her questions, no matter how small they seemed, and encouraged her every step of the way. You're doing great, he said, watching her closely as she tightened a screw with a tool she had never held before. Alara glanced up at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile. The words were simple, but to her, they meant everything. It wasn't just about fixing a door. It was about feeling like she was capable of doing something on her own. "I'm starting to see what you mean," Alara admitted as she finished her task, looking at the panel with a sense of accomplishment. "It's not so difficult when you understand what you're doing." Nathan nodded. "Exactly. You just need the right tools and a little patience. The same goes for life. We're often overwhelmed by things we don't understand, but with time and effort, they become manageable." They both took a step back and looked at the now fixed door. It was a simple act, but it felt like an important milestone. For Alara, it represented something bigger, something she had never experienced before. She had always been told what to do and when to do it. She had never been asked to think, to create, or to learn for the sake of learning. It was liberating. "I didn't expect to feel so proud," she said quietly. "In my past, I only ever existed to serve others, to fix things. But now, it feels like I have purpose." Nathan's expression softened as he looked at her. "You have a purpose, Alara, and it's yours to decide. I'm just here to help, if that's what you want." A comfortable silence fell between them as they stood together in the small workshop, looking at the door. The simple task had become a bridge between them, a quiet understanding of what they could build together. The door in front of them seemed to symbolize more than just a mechanical repair. It represented the invisible barriers that had kept Alara in the dark for so long. And with every step she took toward understanding, those barriers became just a little less imposing. Later that day, Alara explored the ship a little more. There were still parts of it she hadn't seen, but she felt more and more confident as she moved from room to room. Her hands, once hesitant, were now more comfortable handling everyday tasks. The freedom she was experiencing had become a gift she wasn't sure how to fully appreciate. Still, she was learning to embrace it. While Nathan continued his work in the engine room, Alara took it upon herself to clean a section of the living quarters. She swept and tidied up, realizing how small and yet important these tasks were. As she worked, she noticed how neat and orderly everything was inside the ship. Even in this cramped, utilitarian space, Nathan's attention to detail was evident. She smiled to herself. "All right, mission accomplished," she said aloud with a quiet laugh as she finished her work. "Maybe I'm not so useless after all." When Nathan appeared later in the day, he immediately noticed her efforts. "Looks like someone's getting the hang of this," he said, his voice filled with pride. Alara shrugged, but there was a spark in her eyes. "I guess I am. And it feels good." Nathan leaned against the doorframe, looking at her with appreciation. "You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, Alara." Her heart warmed at his words, and for the first time, she felt as though she truly belonged somewhere. "Thanks, Nathan," she said quietly, the words carrying a weight they had never held before. The sense of connection between them grew, even in these simple moments. They were both in this new life together, learning, growing, and discovering the kind of freedom they had always dreamed of. Neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time, they didn't feel afraid. As the days went on, Alara continued to grow more confident in her new life aboard Nathan's ship. Each day was a discovery, a journey into a world she had never imagined. No longer was she living under the thumb of those who sought to control her. With Nathan, she had a sense of freedom, of choice that she hadn't known before. It wasn't just about learning new skills anymore. It was about understanding what it meant to be herself, to feel human despite her alien background. Every time she successfully completed a task or made a decision for herself, a small part of her felt more whole. One evening, after another quiet meal aboard the ship, Nathan and Alara sat in the common room. The stars glowed outside the small windows, painting the space in soft, shimmering light. "Do you ever get scared?" Alara asked, her voice quiet in the peaceful setting. She had been holding on to this question for a while, wondering if Nathan ever felt uncertain about the future. Nathan paused for a moment, clearly thinking about her words. I get scared sometimes, more than I'd like to admit. Elira turned to look at him, surprised. Really? You never seem scared. That's the funny thing about fear, Nathan replied, his tone thoughtful. It doesn't show on the surface. But it's always there. It's just that we find ways to live with it. Elira could sense the weight behind his words. She wondered about her own fears, the ones that had haunted her for years. The fear of being controlled, of never being in charge of her own destiny. But with Nathan, that fear was slowly fading. You've been brave, she said quietly. Much braver than I think I could be, going out there in space all alone. Nathan smiled at her, a soft, almost nostalgic smile. We all have our moments of bravery. You're learning that now, Elira. You don't need to be afraid anymore. For the first time, Elira believed him. She had spent so much of her life surviving, staying hidden and afraid. But now she was realizing that perhaps bravery wasn't about avoiding fear. Maybe it was about facing it, standing up in the face of what held her back. She thought back to the repairs on the ship and how, though small, it had required her to overcome self-doubt. A few days later, they encountered something unexpected, a distress signal coming from a nearby planet. Nathan immediately adjusted course, heading toward the source of the signal. It had been a while since either of them had encountered anyone other than each other, and the mystery intrigued them both. You ready for some adventure? Nathan asked as they prepared to investigate. Elira hesitated, but only for a moment. Her old fears were still with her, lurking in the background. But instead of shrinking from them, she found herself standing straighter. I think so, she replied, determination in her voice. Good, Nathan said. Stay close to me. I'll show you the ropes. The planet was barren, with rocky cliffs and a pale sky that seemed to go on forever. It was clear that no one had lived there for a long time. The distress signal was weak, but it was enough to know that someone, or something, was in trouble. They landed the ship on a flat surface and carefully ventured outside, the alien landscape stretching out before them. Elira took in the view with wide eyes. Though the world looked cold and desolate, something about it felt like an invitation to understand what lay beyond their own small corner of the universe. As they trekked toward the signal's source, Nathan and Elira exchanged only brief words, focused on the task at hand. The signal seemed to lead them toward a small cave nestled at the edge of the cliffs. Inside the cave, they found an old, damaged ship, a spacecraft of alien origin. The metal was rusted and twisted, evidence that the ship had crash-landed here a long time ago. It didn't take long to spot the remains of a pilot, long gone but still giving off faint life readings. Elira gasped, taking a step back. They didn't make it, she murmured, sadness in her voice. Nathan nodded somberly. No, but we're not here for them. We're here to understand what happened. There could still be something useful left in this wreckage. They went inside the damaged ship, carefully searching through what remained. Pieces of technology lay scattered among the debris, some still functional. Nathan worked swiftly, inspecting and gathering the parts that might help them in the future. Elira, though uneasy, followed closely behind. The scene before her, the wreckage, the emptiness, reminded her of her own life before meeting Nathan. Broken, without direction. I never thought about what happened to others like this, Elira said softly, almost to herself. How did it come to this? Nathan paused for a moment, then spoke in his calm, even tone. Sometimes things break down. Ships crash, people make mistakes, and life doesn't always go as planned. But that's why we have to keep going, to keep learning. We can't let the past dictate the future. For a moment, Elira stood silently, thinking about what Nathan had said. There was wisdom in those words, wisdom she hadn't realized she was looking for. The wreckage in the cave wasn't just about tragedy. It was a reminder. No matter how many times things broke down, it was always possible to rebuild, to repair, and to move forward. Nathan had been doing it his whole life, and now she was learning to do the same. When they finished searching the wreckage, they headed back to the ship, the weight of the scene heavy on Alira's mind. The journey wasn't over. They had a lot more to discover, but this adventure, no matter how small, felt like another step toward something better. As the days passed, Alira found herself more at ease. The once lonely and strange world of space was slowly becoming her home, and Nathan was becoming someone she trusted deeply. They continued their journey, navigating through uncharted regions and repairing old ships along the way. Every day, Alira learned something new, either about the universe or about herself. One morning, Nathan called her into the control room, his voice filled with excitement. "We've got company," he said with a grin. "An old freighter just sent out a distress signal. Looks like it's in trouble." Alira's heart raced. "Another one?" she asked, hoping that there wouldn't be any more wrecked ships. But Nathan's expression was serious. "This one's different. We need to check it out." The freighter was larger than any ship they had encountered before, its hull showing signs of damage but still holding together. Nathan set the ship down a safe distance away and signaled for Alira to follow him. "Stay close," Nathan reminded her, adjusting his gear as they prepared to leave the ship. Alira nodded, determined. No longer did she feel like the frightened slave she once was. With Nathan at her side, she had grown stronger, bolder. Outside the ship, the vastness of space spread out before them. The planets hung in the sky, silent and distant. This was their world now, and Alira was ready to explore every part of it. The freighter's cargo hold had been sealed off, but Nathan was able to bypass the locks. Together, they made their way into the dark, broken interior. The lights flickered, and the sounds of the ship groaned and moaned, as if it were on the verge of falling apart completely. As they ventured deeper into the ship, a strange noise echoed through the halls, soft, like a faint cry. Alira's eyes widened. She had heard that noise before, but never in a good context. "Someone's still alive," she whispered. Nathan motioned for her to stay quiet, then led the way. They followed the sound, passing through rusted corridors. After a few minutes of searching, they arrived at a locked room. The door was dented, its mechanism broken from what seemed like an explosion. Nathan knelt down, working his way through the wires and circuitry. The door groaned as it slowly opened, revealing a cramped space filled with damaged equipment. The faint cry was louder now, but it was still hard to make out the source. To their surprise, the room wasn't empty. A small alien, a child by the looks of it, lay crumpled on the floor, barely conscious. It was a creature unlike anything Alira had seen before, small and fragile, with translucent skin and glowing veins. Alira's heart ached at the sight of the young alien, helpless and hurt. She knelt down beside the child, her hand reaching out instinctively. "Can you help it?" she asked Nathan, fear creeping into her voice. Nathan moved closer, assessing the situation. "I'll do what I can." He carefully picked up the child, who seemed too weak to move on their own. Alira stepped back, a wave of guilt washing over her. Here was another being in need, another reminder of how fragile life could be, even in a world as vast as this one. They carried the child back to the ship, and Nathan wasted no time preparing the medical equipment. Alira stood by, offering support as best she could. The hours that followed were long, tense, as they waited for the child to wake. Nathan worked tirelessly, administering fluids, stabilizing the alien's vitals, and making adjustments to keep them alive. Throughout it all, Alira stayed close by, watching and learning. The knowledge she had gained from traveling with Nathan was helping her, but more than that, she was beginning to understand the importance of the work they were doing. "You saved them," Alira said softly when the child's breathing finally became steady. Nathan looked at her, his expression tired but filled with pride. It was the right thing to do. Alira smiled, feeling a sense of pride herself. She was no longer just a bystander in someone else's mission. With every step she took, every decision she made, she was becoming an active participant, a protector in her own right. After a long day of care, the alien child finally regained consciousness. Their eyes fluttered open, glowing softly. Alira was the first to meet their gaze. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, not wanting to frighten them. The alien blinked, looking up at her before looking around at the ship's interior, disoriented. Nathan joined her beside the child, offering a comforting smile. "You're safe. We're here to help." The child did not respond immediately, but their small hand reached out tentatively, touching Alira's arm as though seeking comfort. A wave of warmth swept through Alira, and in that moment, she realized something important. It wasn't just about survival, it was about connection, about caring for those who needed it, whether they were human, alien, or anything in between. As the child settled back into the medical bed, Nathan turned to Alira with a look of understanding. "This is why we do what we do," he said quietly. Alira nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of all that had led her here. She had left everything she knew, but now, in the face of this innocent life, she felt more at peace than ever before. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm. Nathan and Alira worked side by side, helping each other with repairs and tasks as they continued their journey through the galaxy. The young alien child slowly recovered, their strength returning day by day. Every moment spent with the child made Alira realize how much her life had changed. Once, she had been nothing more than a slave, a prisoner to her own fate. But now she was part of something larger, something meaningful. Alira felt something stir within her heart each time the child reached out for her. It wasn't just gratitude, although she was grateful beyond measure. It was something deeper, a recognition that life was fragile, and it was their responsibility to protect it, no matter the cost. One evening, as the ship cruised through the empty space, Nathan called Alira to the observation deck. The stars glittered around them in perfect silence, a vast ocean of light that stretched endlessly beyond the edges of their vision. "Look at this," Nathan said, his voice thoughtful. "This is the universe, Alira. So wide, so full of possibilities. But it's also lonely sometimes. We all need someone to help guide us." Alira stood beside him, looking out at the stars. She had never truly seen the universe before. Not like this. Not from the perspective of someone who had been freed, who had a place and a purpose. "I'm starting to understand," she replied softly. "What we're doing. How it matters." Nathan smiled. "You're not alone anymore." She smiled back, a feeling of warmth spreading through her chest. In this endless expanse of space, it was comforting to know she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Over the next few days, the ship's journey took them to unfamiliar star systems, stopping at various ports and stations. They helped travelers in distress and made repairs when necessary. It felt like a never-ending mission, but it was a mission that brought purpose to their lives. One morning, while Nathan worked on the ship's engine, Alira took a moment to observe the small alien child who had grown quite fond of her. The child sat by the window, gazing at the vast cosmos outside, their wide eyes reflecting the shimmering stars. Alira thought about how much had changed, how much she had grown. The life of a slave was a distant memory, like something that had happened to someone else entirely. "You look like you're deep in thought," Nathan said, his voice pulling her back to reality. She turned toward him, smiling softly. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened. How much has changed for me." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel about it?" Alira hesitated for a moment, then spoke honestly. "Free. I feel free. I used to think that freedom was a luxury, but it isn't. It's something everyone should have, even the child." Nathan looked thoughtful. "You're right. No one should be trapped in a life they didn't choose." Alira's gaze fell back to the child. "I will do whatever it takes to make sure they have the choice, the freedom they deserve." Nathan stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support. "And I'll be right beside you," he said. "We'll do it together." Their eyes met, a silent promise passing between them. The bond they shared had grown far beyond the practical tasks they faced. It had become about something more meaningful: purpose, trust, and love. Alira's thoughts shifted again to their journey. She no longer saw their travels as merely a series of fixes and challenges. She saw them as the stepping stones toward something greater. The road ahead, though uncertain, was full of possibility. Whether they continued their work as ship repairers or ventured out to explore new worlds, Alira was ready. "Isn't it strange," Nathan said, breaking her thoughts, "how the universe can seem so vast, yet at the same time, everything we do here feels so connected." Alira glanced up at him, her heart warming at the thought. "Yes," she agreed. "It's like every action, no matter how small, ripples out in ways we might never fully understand. But we can still make a difference." They both fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the stars streaked past them. The ship hummed steadily beneath their feet, a safe and constant presence in the shifting cosmos. Later that day, they received a message from a distant colony in need of help. The coordinates were far from their current location, but Alira didn't hesitate. "We should go. It's what we do," she said. Nathan nodded. "Exactly. It's what we do. We don't stop helping. We don't stop doing what's right." With a shared sense of purpose, they set a course toward the new destination. Alira had come a long way from the girl she had once been. Afraid, helpless, uncertain. Now she was someone who could make a choice. Someone who could stand side by side with Nathan, changing the world one good deed at a time. As the ship rocketed forward through the void, Alira looked out at the stars once more. She realized something important. Freedom wasn't just about escaping from something. It was about finding where you truly belonged. And she knew, without a doubt, that she had found it. Her place was here, among the stars, with Nathan and the child they had saved. They were her family now, and she was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead, because together, they could face anything.